she's got one foot and daddy ain't got none. Two folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and roll and hopping round the place, get to drinking in the wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.
Hi, welcome to Amputee Wisdom, where everyday people living with limb loss share their stories, their challenges, and their success after their amputation. I'm Amira Radovic, your host, and today with me, our guest is Bill Spiker, who is kind enough to share his story and his experience of living with limb loss. Hi, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I just wanted to start out with just having you introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us.
Okay, I'm a 78-year-old bilateral amputee. Had limb loss for 8 years. Actually, my story goes back almost over 20 years because I live with an amputee, and also my wife is not only an amputee, she's a paraplegic suffering from a car accident some 21 years ago. And we lived with her situation for 10 years before I got sick, first of all with Lyme disease and subsequently with leukemia. The Lyme disease seemed to set me up for the leukemia. The leukemia in turn set me up for a blood infection, sepsis. That was so bad I went into septic shock and lost, actually both legs looked like I'd been on Mount Everest without clothing. Bad frostbite, same with my hand. I woke up after 10 days in a coma with black hands and legs, and they said I was going to lose my legs. Of course, my first reaction was denial, because we can't have 2 amputees in the same family. You can't have 2 people in wheelchairs in the same family. And yet it was true. So for the last 10 years, both of us have been living with limb loss, and with Carol, much tougher situation with the paraplegia.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting that first you had someone in the family who was already living with limb loss and paraplegia, and then your unfortunate experience with having to lose your limb due to Lyme disease, you said?
Start off with Lyme disease. As you can tell, we live in the woods, and so who knows where that little tick came from. But
lots of deers.
Lots of deer, and you saw the deer too, yep. Even though we live in the city. So yeah, that made for a very interesting first year, because for the first, I'm going to say 6-8 weeks, no, maybe a little more like 2.5, 3 months, I was in a wheelchair. And it's traffic jam here in the morning around breakfast time. Even worse in smaller houses when you have 2 people in wheelchairs. They take up a lot of room. So I was very motivated to get into prosthetics and get back on my feet.
So did you both so you're a bilateral, below the knee?
Below the knee.
Below the knee amputee. You had both your amputations the first time.
Yes, and actually there's a backstory to that which might be helpful, because the surgeon planned on removing my right leg below the knee, but the left leg he could keep all the way down to the heel. They called it a Symes amputation. And it made sense to me to keep as much limb as possible. But Carol's prosthetics outfit down in Washington, a guy named Mike Corcoran, does all the Walter Reed contractual work. He got me on the phone 2 days before surgery and said, "Bill, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Get 2 below the knee amputations. I'll have you playing golf." This was in February, by the way. He said, "I'll have you playing golf by June if you have bilateral. If you have a Symes amputation on one and a bilateral or a below the knee on the other, you're going to be miserable. You're going to go back for more surgery. Believe me." And he was right. Anybody that's involved with physical therapy for amputees will tell you that was very solid advice. So he saved me a lot of grief with that advice.
And he was able to convince you the first time to lose more limb than you wanted to?
Well, the thought of having to go through it twice was frightening enough in itself, but what he said made sense. And sure enough, I've heard of other people that have had below the knee on one leg and a Symes on the other, and they're miserable. They can't walk, they can't. Apparently it's very difficult to get a prosthetic that works with a Symes amputation. It's a viable option when you have one good leg and a Symes. That works okay. But if you're dealing with a prosthetic of one type and then you're dealing with a different type on the other, it's almost impossible to walk, so I'm told.
And one thing that you mentioned is that when you found out that you had to get your amputation, you were in denial. What was that time period like between when you found out you had to get your amputation and when you actually got your amputation? What was the...
Well, when I woke up with the gangrene of feet and hands, and God, it was even on my face, and I just said, well, it's all going to go away. And actually, excuse me, I was told that some of it would improve, but unfortunately not a whole lot. This hand turned out to be okay, this hand not so well. And the feet never, well, one foot did recover enough that I could have had the Symes amputation. So I was in complete denial. First of all, I thought statistically, how many people have already an amputee in the household and now you're going to have a second? So anyway, yeah, it was denial right up to, I guess, a week before the amputations. And by then I realized I couldn't walk, I couldn't do anything. They had to go.
And you had amputations in your fingers?
Yeah, I had, well, I had to go back and have one revised. Probably should have had another one revised, but the docs knew that I was an artist and I really needed my hands. Plus Carol pleaded for the hands, so as a paraplegic, she knows how valuable her hands are in dealing with everything. Plus she's an artist as well, so yeah, we got to have her hands.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What are some of the challenges that you faced right after you got your amputation? How did that affect your life right after?
Well, the biggest challenge, as I say, was traffic jam around the kitchen in the morning. But others were, well, you have two challenges mainly. One is a psychological one and the other one's physiological. And just getting your, first of all, I'd been in a wheelchair long enough that I started having some real back problems from just sitting too much. Apparently your hip flexors shorten and it really affects your lower back. So I had to get over that. Just about the time I was learning to walk in prosthetics, I had a real tough time, as most amputees do, with the distal end of the tibia rubbing against the bottom of the socket. The idea behind current technology is equal distribution of weight around different areas of the socket, but most of us do slip into the bottom, and two things happen. You can either rub on the bottom, or it can act like a bell clanger and move back and forth and rub. But in either case, you get severe distal pain. That, and once I got past that and got into PT, just learned to walk again. I asked Mike Corcoran, he was a great source of information, and I think it's really key to find a really good prosthetics guru, because they can teach you so much that even the PTs sometimes neglect to tell you. And I had good PTs. For instance, Mike said very early on, make sure your PT shows you how to get off the ground, because you're gonna fall. There are two types of, like cyclists, I used to be a cyclist, two types of cyclists, those who have fallen and those who are gonna fall. Well, that's the same with prosthetics users. You're gonna fall sooner or later. And as a bilateral, it's really hard to get up. And in fact, my physical therapist said, boy, were challenged with that before. And we really had to work on how to do it. We solved it, but that's why when I'm doing work that requires getting down on the floor, like working on a deck, both here at this house and at the beach house, I have to use the stumpies. And also it makes it much easier to get in and out of a kayak and do a lot of things. So these long prosthetics just don't work for getting up off the ground, but short ones you can pop right up.
I'd like to touch base on the stumpies, but first I wanted to ask, what was like your biggest fear after you got your amputation? What was something that you thought would never be the same again right afterwards?
I guess I had a number of athletic activities that I was concerned about, and sure enough, one was cycling, a road cyclist, and to some degree a mountain biker, but mainly road cyclist. I couldn't figure out how I was ever going to clip in and clip out because you can't turn your ankles. And I asked Mike Corcoran once, and he said, next time you're here, I've got an Paralympic cyclist. He'll tell you how to do that. Well, his answer was, I'm usually so sweated up after a ride that I come out of the sleeve. I can't get out of it anyway. So he does a laugh in fall, and
he just falls.
I said, that's not an option. Falling is not an option.
How old was he?
Yeah, he was in his 20s. So there is an age difference here. Young guys don't mind falling. Us old guys don't like it. So my solution to that was buy a life cycle. So I don't worry about riding outside anymore. I watch the news and pedal inside. Another one was windsurfing. I love to windsurf. Probably missed that more than the cycling for sure. And I just absolutely cannot. I've got a new pair of feet I'm really anxious to try, but I can't even get on one of those big paddle boards without falling. There's some funny video of me getting on. You used to have these skinny little boards, we call them sinkers. I could ride one of those things with no problem. I've got one of these battleships that I can't get on it and bam. You really need your ankles and your feet to do anything on a surfboard. So I haven't been able to figure that out, but I do have a new pair of feet, a new pair of stumpies that do articulate every which way. They're called sidekicks. And so I'm anxious to try those. I haven't had them on down there yet.
And they're waterproof? So
they're waterproof.
Oh, that's really exciting. Really exciting.
Yeah.
Huh. So basically trying to get back into your regular activities that you were doing before was like...
Well, first of all, I guess you didn't worry too much. Maybe one story that might be of interest is when there was a group of us, 4 of us went away every June, sometimes to Scotland, sometimes to Ireland. I say sometimes, once to Ireland and once to Scotland, once to Whistling Straits. We were going to go to Bandon Dunes. So we traveled every June to play golf somewhere. And this particular year that I lost my legs, we were going to Pinehurst. And I told the guys, I guess I'm out. I'm not going. And they said, yeah, you are. You're going. I said, guys, it's March. I'm not even in prosthetics yet. I can't play golf in June. Well, the first thing they ask you when you go through the first day of physical therapy, they say, what are your goals? And I'd overhear other people say, well, I want to be able to stand up in the kitchen and reach things, or I want to walk the dog. I said, I've got to tee off at Pinehurst on June 22nd. And everybody went, whoa. And they said, well, that's a new one. But it was a great rallying cry because they'd bring in putters, and it was great drills for learning to balance. The big key initially on prosthetics is how to learn to walk, but basically get your balance, because it's like walking on stilts. You just, at least as a bilateral. So anyway, that became a rallying cry, and Christiana wrote it up in their magazine, and there was a poster and all this sort of thing. So it was fun. Golf really wasn't that important to me, except that it was one thing I could do, and I still can do, and so I value it for that reason. It wasn't my favorite sport, very frustrating, and it's my golf buddies will tell you I never was very good, so I don't need an extra challenge to throw on top of it. But it did get the PT moving, and there was a very specific goal, and I did actually tee off. If you figure I lost my legs in the middle of February, and I'm playing golf in June, that was not too bad.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I guess like the motivation to be able to like go out again, that was
yeah, exactly.
Your recovery.
Well, I couldn't very well. If my buddies were going to put up with me, I couldn't very well say I'm going to wimp out. I couldn't do it. And speaking of wimping out, my wife Carol is an amazing example of getting through and keeping a smile on your face. Nobody wants to be around somebody that's in despair and feeling sorry for themselves. And so that got me through that first year big time too. couldn't wimp out in front of her either.
So family and friends really played a big role in the recovery process and in
And
motivating you to move forward.
neighbors were incredible, helping us take trash cans out. Little things you might not think of. How do you get the trash cans out? How do you get them back? Well, the neighbors saw it right away. Jumped right in.
So community-
Besides the usual, covered dish supper every now and then, which is always wonderful. Jumping in on those other little things was just terrific.
And did you have to reach out to your neighbors to
No,
let them know
they
you
did
needed
it.
help? Or?
They saw it and
Oh, that's amazing.
jumped in.
Oh, that's amazing. I think that's
Well, I don't think anybody could believe it.
Yeah.
two of us in wheelchairs, two former marathoners, and here we are, both wheeling around the house. So
Have you been able to run a marathon or do a marathon since your amputation?
I don't run at all, and mainly because of back issues. But I had already stopped running, so that's why I didn't mention earlier that wasn't hard to give up because I'd already given that up.
Yeah, I can't run a marathon, and I'm young, so we'll just kind of skip that. So in regards to like the challenges that you had, you were able to overcome that because you had a community around you, not just family, but friends and neighbors who really just wanted to help you.
They helped with the logistics, and then, as I say, we had this wonderful prosthetics provider that Carol again discovered prior to my situation. MCOP down in Silver Spring, Maryland. Wilmington Hospital's PT outfit on the 6th floor, just terrific. So we had the right professionals helping, and then we had this amazing support group of friends, neighbors, and family.
Speaking of support groups, after your amputation, apart from your family and friends, were there other external resources or groups that you were affiliated with to help you through the recovery process?
No, they didn't exist 8 years ago.
8 years ago.
Yeah. I was given a couple of names of one Bilateral and that he had tried to start a support group and didn't have much success. There is a very successful one at Wilmington Hospital. It's also actually called this Amputee Support Group. I've also found that there's a Facebook page, which didn't exist 8 years ago, that's very helpful. A lot of people worldwide ask questions. Some really good questions and some not so good, but it's help. It's a help. Yeah, but back then I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. But the MCOP people and the PTs were, they answered just about everything. And the rest you just figure out for yourself.
And what's the name of the Facebook group?
Amputee Help and Support Group.
Amputee Help and Support Group.
Correct.
And in regards to trying to do research on your own, so you had the physical therapists and the prosthetists who tried to help you as best as they could. How helpful were they? Really, is it like majority of the work you have to find yourself going on online?
Well, I was warned not so much with as an amputee, but prior when I had Lyme disease and when I had leukemia, I was warned by most of the medical professionals, stay off the internet. You're going to get some really bad advice. Oh, wow. And sure enough, there's some ridiculous information out there. So I actually didn't use it much until that Facebook page or thread started. I didn't really use the internet. Again, the folks down in Silver Spring do all the Walter Reed work. They've seen everything and done everything. That's how Carol got fit. Carol went to Penn, she went to Hopkins, she went locally, could not find anybody. She's a very high amputee. You might ask, why does a paraplegic need a prosthetic? Well, she's a painter, and she gets up, in fact, later we can go see her painting. She gets in a stand-up chair so she can do bigger canvases. So she really wanted a prosthetic. And the MCOP people, Mike Corcoran, bam, first time said, I don't see the big deal, and had her a prosthetic in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So they really were a huge help. I mean, just a silly thing like, Mike, I said, how do I put my pants on? You put these legs on and he said, no, you put the legs down and you throw the pant legs over there. You put it, then you get into prosthetics, then you pull your pants up.
Wow.
I cheated and put zippers in my pants. But,
but those are important things that people need to know. Like just little everyday things can be very challenging if you don't think about it till you're in the situation.
Yeah, I met a guy down at MCOP, and he is a bilateral, and he said the only way he deals with it is just wear shorts all the time, even in the wintertime. Which actually is I don't know if this is a little bit off topic, but I find it very funny. This time of year, as it's getting warm and it's appropriate to wear shorts again, you sort of expose yourself. Because in the wintertime, when you've got long pants on, you just look like a stumbling old fool walking around. But when you're in shorts, walking around, showing that what you're dealing with a pair of prosthetics, people say, wow, that's pretty incredible. So it's part of it is I like to be anonymous, but the other part is it's sort of nice to show off a little bit every now and then too. And different amputees have different responses to that. Particularly women, I think, don't. It's a disfigurement, and they don't want to be seen as a amputee. Maybe it's part of me as not just being a male, but also being old. I really don't care. It's fine. In fact, it gives me excuse to. And people do treat you differently, by the way, when they see what you're dealing with.
Have you always been this positive since your amputation, or is it something that you had to gradually get used to and say, like, I don't care what people think?
It's a little bit of everything. I don't like to answer questions. I met a kid, a really wonderful guy, that lost his leg to a shark. Oh, wow. And first thing I said to him when I met him, I said, boy, it's nice to meet somebody that lost their leg in a manly way. And he said, he was very depressed at the time. He said, I don't know what difference it makes to this guy to lose a leg. First of all, he was young. Yeah. And second of all, he was in an environment where there were just nothing but older people. And fortunately, I got him hooked up with the MCOP people. They took him down and met soldiers from Walter Reed, guys his same age, dealing with the same, and it made a world of difference. He said it made a world of difference, that to meet other people in the same situation. And he's fine now. In fact, he's studying to be a occupational therapist himself. He was an oceanographer. That's how he got in a school of sharks that he shouldn't have been in.
I mean, this kind of iterates the importance of having like a support system and other people who are just like you going through the same experience, right? Like
it's
that
huge.
Really helps you mentally overcome some of the challenges that you experience. I mean, you had Carol. Did you have anyone else that you were able to speak to?
Not really, other than, again, meeting. I tried a prosthetics outfit, which is a wonderful outfit up here in Wilmington, but I went back to DC because they did so many bilaterals. I could go in there on a given day and I'll meet 2 other bilaterals. And in our support group up here, there's one above the knee bilateral who's a wonderful guy. He's got his own demons to deal with. He's got far bigger challenge than I do. Being a below the knee amputee versus above the knee is like a difference between a paraplegic and a quadriplegic. Us below the knee have so much easier time of it than the above the knee. So, I really don't know anybody in Wilmington that's a bilateral below the knee.
Wow. That's so impressive that you were able to like figure a lot of these things out on your own. Well, you have to, right? You don't really have much of a choice.
Exactly.
You have a great community around you to support you. You had mentioned that in regards to the appearance of having a bilateral amputation, even having a prosthesis, you have people who make weird comments or ask questions. What are some of like the weirdest or funniest things that you've heard or that you've been asked, or misconceptions that people have?
Well, it's weird the way people, well, I'll tell you one story that I got so tired of telling people that, oh, I had a blood infection, I got sick, I had sepsis, and that's how I lost. I said, I'm going to make up something more exotic. And friends said, oh yeah, let it go, let it rip. Well, we were going through airport security in Aspen, Colorado, leaving, and Carol was all stopped. They really frisked her, and I had gotten through fairly quickly, unlike Philadelphia Airport. That's a whole different story. But this guy, he was all duded up in a cowboy outfit and fancy cowboy boots, and he had everything but spurs. And he came over and said, "How'd you lose your leg, dude?" Or legs. And I said, "Oh, I had frostbite on Annapurna." It's a mountain. And I said, "Carol, get moving, get out of there quickly." Because he said, "Oh, dude, how did that happen?" And he went on and on. He kept asking me questions. I said, "Oh, God, Carol,
You should have stuck
please
with the
hurry. I can't do this." That's the first and only time I tried that, because it was really embarrassing. So I don't know why I told you that story, but
I think it's funny, yeah, because people are curious. People want to know, especially little children.
oh, little kids,
right?
and yeah, I've never come up with a good response, except that sometimes they solve it for me. They say, "Hey, where did you get the robotic legs?" And or if they don't, that's my answer is, "What do you think?" And kids are wonderful, and the parents are always trying to pull them away, but no, that's wonderful.
But they're curious.
They're very curious, yeah. And it's not, God bless the veterans coming home and the media attention. I think a lot of the stigma of being an amputee and the disfigurement and the weirdness is gone away. Maybe it's my own imagination or my own hopeful thinking, but I really think that it's not nearly as weird as it would have been even 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, before all the messes in the Middle East started.
Has anyone ever asked you if you lost it due to war or if you were a veteran?
I had a funny thing happen just last week at Home Depot. A girl checking me out said, "Are you a veteran?" And I said, "Well, I was in the Coast Guard." And she said, "Well, where's your card?" And I said, "That was 40 years ago." And she said, "Well, you get a discount for being a veteran." And I said, "Well, I didn't know that. I've been coming to Home Depot for years." Well, she saw my prosthetics. It was the day I had shorts on. And I thought, geez, I hope she didn't think I was a disabled vet, because anyway.
I mean, you still served the country.
Well, I did, but I certainly didn't lose my legs in the Coast Guard.
I'm thinking, again, as you mentioned, because of the war, a lot of people might see people who have amputated limbs and think it's due to some kind of war casualty or war that happened. So I have heard stories about that, where some people think, like, just because you have an amputation that you were served in the military of some sort, and that was the cause.
Well, that was certainly this cashier's thought. Of course, it turned out I didn't argue with her either.
But at least you learned something new, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
So just kind of moving forward in regards to the questions that I had, what are some things that you wish you had known when you got your amputation? I know earlier when we were speaking about K levels, was that something that you knew right away?
No, I did not know about K levels, and it turned out they're important because the insurance companies will only give you, let's say, the better equipment. The legs I have on right now are electronic, they're proprios. The very latest author, the manufacturer, had another version of it earlier, which I have as well. The other nice thing about MCOP is, because they do all the Walter Reed work, they get things in on a beta test basis. So I tested those. I'm testing these. I do not own these. The insurance companies have not paid for either version. I test them, and then if they want them back, they get them back.
The current prosthesis you're wearing.
Right. But I couldn't get those if I was a K1. You have to be at least a K3 for Medicare to even consider paying for something like that.
And what's the difference between a K1, 2, 3?
I can't be specific because I can't remember, except the K1 is basically someone that like the person that just wanted to reach things in their kitchen. They don't want to even walk in them necessarily. They just want to be able to get out of their wheelchair every now and then. K2 is somewhere between that level and a K3. K3 has 10 levels, sub-levels. You can be a 3-1, 3-2, 3-3. Like I'm about a 3-8, I'm told, to a 4-1. Unfortunately, the system doesn't really isn't really pertinent to bilaterals. It's only for unilaterals.
Mama, she's got 1 foot and daddy ain't got none. 2 folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and roll and hopping round the place, get to drinking and they wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.